Oh man.
Someone in the chat just wrote, "Hey, I like your shoelaces,"
Oh no.
Oh no.
which is ancient Tumblr code.
Thanks, the president gave them to me.
We just sound like we've lost our minds to Lewis.
I mean,
Who I don't
Haven't
think, Lewis,
we?
I don't think you have a Tumblr, do you? So
I was a very sheltered upbringing. Internet was switched off after 10, so I wouldn't know about this kind of thing.
Probably for the best.
yeah, almost definitely for the best.
yeah, it will lead you to do bizarre things like be a published author or do a 24-hour Hollow Knight stream.
We're getting there. We're getting there. Look, we're under the 3 hour mark. We're under 3 hours. In less than 3 hours, Sky, you will be in bed.
Oh my god.
I mean,
so yeah.
you've raised an insane amount of money. I'm looking at it now. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Folk have been awesome. Folk have just not stopped.
Our initial stretch goal was £500.
Wow.
And we've blown that away.
Yeah.
Also, I'm just going to drop a link that was given to us by Scott Cuthbertson of the Equality Network. I believe it is the report done by the Equality Network on trans representation in Scotland, and there was also one for bisexuality. If anyone is down for some light morning reading. So I suppose, obviously, like, in some ways, Lewis, your understanding of your gender identity is very different and very similar to mine, in which it was a fairly, obviously, private thing, kind of in a time where you were mostly online.
Yeah,
and not in the real world.
I've been thinking about this a lot, particularly over summer when things opened up for a while and we got to see some more people, and then now again that we're sucked back into just self-isolating. That gender is such a social thing, and then here I am being like, I remember speaking to a non-binary friend not long after I came out, and they were saying that they don't really feel much sense of gender around other people at all. Like, if they're by themselves, then they don't feel like a gendered person, because your gender is yourself in a social context. And I've been thinking about that so much because, yeah, the only people I've been out to are, I've been publicly out, but I've not really met anyone. So it's like, for people who don't necessarily understand non-binariness and don't know many trans people, I'm yet to give them something to expect. Like what's going to be different. I feel like I don't know. It's a strange world to navigate, not knowing. Sorry, I'm trying to think what I'm trying to say here.
It's all right. No matter what happens, you're going to make more coherent sense than both me and I.
So, yeah, maybe it's making sense in your sleep delirium without. But yeah, I just think it's given me, and a lot of other friends who've come out over this last year, like, we've seen so many people coming out, and I think that goes to show that when you take away all these kind of social pressures and like the constant reinforcement of heteronormative cultures on all sides, that people do realize that they aren't a binary. You know, they don't have to conform to two specific kinds of people. I just don't think that's realistic. The fact that we use these words is prescriptive rather than descriptive of how people are, if that makes sense.
There's also just it's very. The pandemic has made a lot of people realize how performative a lot of it is, because you're performing to an expectation. just even in the simplest of terms, you've seen so many women being like, I don't want to wear makeup anymore. Like, just basic things. Like, they're like, why should I do that? Men don't, or like, I watched a friend go through like a full-on revolution of like, men don't have to do this. Why am I doing it? I'm in lockdown. It was like this full-on like, yes, you understand. You don't have to keep performing to an arbitrary standard that's been imposed on you. And that's just even in the simplest of terms for like, you know, it's, and then you have other people that are like, they're getting time to reflect on it. They're not being forced to continually perform to an expected standard. And of course you've got more people coming out because the pressure is no longer there in a sense for
Also,
some people.
completely off topic, Lewis. Chat desperately wants to let you know that the Instagram link in your link tree doesn't work.
I've seen that, and I clicked on it, and it works for me. So I'm gonna remain in my ignorance. No, I'll fix that right now. Does it not work? I'm very upset.
Also, we should definitely work together on a project again soon.
We should. Have you got any films in the works?
I'm back at UWS, so yes, I am.
So yes.
I'm back at the university, yes. So possibly, yeah. Also, I have a slight question now, just for personal thing. You seem to be, when we spoke and I invited you to this, you seem to be surprised that I was non-binary.
I think I just didn't know in uni, particularly if you kept it to close. So yeah,
I wore
I just didn't
makeup
know.
and I'm extremely performative and effeminate.
You have to remember, guy, that I was an extremely naive cis man in uni. So
That's fine. That's
that is
fair,
on
yeah.
me, and I apologize for that.
I was just curious because I was it's really interesting to me because obviously I'm so rooted in my LGBT identity that I kind of just assume that people know now when I meet them.
You know, sorry, I'm fixing this. I'm fixing the link. This should. Right, for everyone asking, that should be it fixed in my Instagram bio. Yeah, I feel the same thing now, and I'm surprised if people don't catch on that and then being like, oh, I thought that this bright rainbow shirt and full makeup would let people know, but I think that goes to show how ignorant you're of LGBT culture you're made to be, being brought up in a very heteronormative surrounding all the time. You know, that you can afford to be ignorant to that, and it's awful. I feel awful, and I feel guilty for that being a part of my upbringing.
Sorry, I'm taking a drink of Lucozade to
No,
stay
sorry,
awake.
I was chugging coffee as well. I feel like
We're all desperately trying to stay awake or wake up.
yeah, it was bold. The 9 a.m. slot. I thought I would be awake a long time for, and I was up just in body, not in spirit, until now. Now I feel that the caffeine's kicking in, and I'm getting a surge.
I suppose anything you want to add on that, Joy? Joy has been sitting with I listening to our minds unravel for 6 hours now.
Yeah, I can't think of it. I lost the train of thought because I was looking at my email, so I forgot what we were talking about.
That's fine.
You're dealing with my ADHD being like, oh, shiny, and then coming back to it. So by the way, only ADHD people get to make the shiny joke. There we go.
Lewis and I were kind of talking about how now that we're the fact that we're both out as non-binary, we just kind of assume that people know when that it's because it's obvious to us that it's obvious to everyone.
Yeah, I have actively stopped thinking about it, and then I'll just say something like the first person I accidentally came out to was my sister-in-law. I just randomly said something, and she just kind of blinked at me, and then she was just like, "All right, cool." But it was things like you say certain, and it was actually a meme, is what it was. And we had this moment of recognition where we're like, "Oh, you know the meme too," and it was just that you were no longer. I would used to avoid saying certain things because I didn't want to out myself to certain people, and now it's just like I don't care. I don't try to hide it. It's just who I am. And if I say something, and if you get it, you get it. If you don't, you don't. Um, and it's
Yeah.
yeah.
We
I
got,
see some.
we got a
Sorry.
question in the chat. though.
Yeah, I was gonna say I saw
Sorry
that.
about
Saw that pop up about how I deal with people not realizing that I'm non-binary. I think I kind of touched on it when, I think I can be quite forgiving of that because, like you were saying, Sky, the fact that I didn't realize that you were out in uni is just a product of my my cis ignorance at the time, and I think
Presumed cis ignorance.
yeah, and I think when that happens to me now,
that. Thank you, Shag Magpie, for the donation. Sorry, just keeping folk updated.
it's all right. I think I've got the patience to kind of like chat it through with them once, and also like I also try and make clear that my experience of gender is in no way the same as anyone else's. I think I've got the patience to talk it through with people, like maybe 3 or 4 times before I'm just like, no, you're wrong. I think I will eventually get to a point where I'm like,
You'll
Or I
become
lose-
jaded.
yeah, or I lose patience with explaining to people that
Mhm.
it's just a way of being as much as any other way of being. But I don't think it upsets me, but not on a personal level. More on a disappointed with the society that I live in and its inability to change. That would be an insight into how I feel about being misgendered.
It's fantastic, yeah. Do you kind of have any questions? You have
I
you
am
have
still
another
here, Laurie.
you have another non-binary person you can grill.
I'm good. Sorry, I dived off for a second there. Just grabbing stuff. No, Lewis, thanks very much for coming on the stream. Obviously you know Sky, and you don't know me. And you do you know much about what the Equality Network do?
I gave it a little read before I came on, but if you have a piece to read, tell me some more about it. I'd love to.
I don't really have my own spiel as such, but one thing that was kind of we've had Scott Cuthbertson on and Mel Maguire on, who are Mel's intersectionality officer and Scott is the sort of development manager for Equality Network, and the sort of the range of events they host, targeted, whether it's I think Mel was chatting about a conference called Bitastic, which is obviously aimed towards the sort of bi community and allies and friends and family of that. And I suppose I'm just wondering how, like, as someone who in the past year has kind of came out in terms of their own gender identity, like, I wonder if you could just kind of speak to the importance of having organisations like the Equality Network for people who are maybe a wee bit curious but don't know too much, and maybe they're looking for information.
Yeah, I think what I was saying earlier about representation being important. I think it's also great to supplement that with organizations that are offering offering real support and help. Like, it's great to have figures in your life who you can like point to and be like, I want to be like them. I want to like look up to them and admire them. But I think having people who can actually offer real advice and real support in terms of like your everyday life, I think that's super important. And yeah, I mean, I'm yet to check out like what specifically they have going on, but I think groups like that are essential, especially under lockdown. You know, check it out if you're feeling questioning. Like, these are the places to go outside of Tumblr. You know.
I mean, Tumblr can be good too.
This is, yeah, case in point. You guys have all given your testimony to Tumblr.
It's not positive testimony by any means. Nah, I'm joking. It's interesting because I like as a cis straight guy, I was not really exposed to anything like, you know, trans people or non-binary people until I actually was on Tumblr, and it was only kind of through learning and being educated by the kind of community on Tumblr that I started to kind of think a wee bit more about these things. Where I probably would have kept my not, it was almost blissful ignorance, like, you know, it wasn't out of any sort of malicious
No,
not
of
wanting
course.
to understand, but it was very much it wasn't on my radar, I suppose.
I think that's what I've been trying to get at, that like the world is designed in such a way that you can kind of, if you're cis, you can kind of just afford to live like that, and it's like it's not
privileged
it's just,
position.
yeah, but yeah, I think once you see the world of like transness, you're like, oh, people are like this all the time. Why isn't this acknowledged and taught and thought about as like a normal part of this world? It's like it is, you know.
100%. I'm wondering, and I'm like, one thing that, I mean, I know everyone's kind of coming out experience is quite different, but once they've found that kind of community of friends within the LGBT community, there's like, you know, their whole social life, particularly if they're maybe coming from, you know, almost like maybe conservative parents or something like that. How has kind of coming out just before lockdown, do you think, kind of impacted your kind of coming out, if you don't mind me asking that question?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else I can say. Do you mean? I mean, quite in terms of like how literal it was. All I got to do was kind of change my pronouns in my post. I couldn't really tell anyone because I was just in my flat by myself. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say other than what I said earlier. Is there anything in particular?
That's absolutely fine. I was just curious, and I wasn't sure if it had already been kind of covered. But yeah, it was just interesting to hear. Like, obviously, one of the things we'd heard from the Equality Network folk was that, you know, a lot of like, you know, events like, you know, Pride hasn't happened this year, and, you know, obviously it's LGBT History Month, and, you know, there's events that would normally be happening haven't been, just by, you know, nature of the pandemic. So I suppose it was just more of a you know, have you like,
yeah, have I felt like I'm part of the community?
Yeah, and I'm not saying that in terms of like, you know, you shouldn't because you've, you know, not participated in events or whatever, but
you're not like, gay until you've been to Pride.
yeah, nah, it's nothing like that. But I suppose it's just like, is there a wee bit of like, oh, I've not had the chance to do what I kind of wanted to do because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, obviously,
same with everyone, but
I'm definitely looking forward to that. But I've not felt I've not felt deprived of opportunities to be queer. You know, I've definitely been making my own fun with, particularly with these videos. Like my more recent stuff performing as Lucy, which is like my synth pop alias. Particularly getting to do that and make all these like super camp videos that are like so theatrical and so colorful. I think that's definitely been an outlet for me to just kind of experiment with, I don't know, still getting to do queer things and still getting to express my identity, even though it's just me. And for now, that's fine because I don't know. I quite enjoy my own company. I'm yet to get bored a year on. I'm quite happy making music myself. So until I can, I mean, I'm definitely looking forward to Pride and to hanging out with more people in the Glasgow LGBT community. But I think until then, I'm happy to accept that it won't happen until it's possible to happen, you know?
Yeah. No, that's fair. Thanks.
No worries.
I'm going to nip to the loo real quick.
Real quick.
No worries. I'm not gonna lie, team. I am getting sick to death of this mod already. You're all annoying the shit out of me, and you're bullying me. So I'm feeling like I'm gonna uninstall it if that's cool. And we could just maybe do some boss runs before the end. We've got time to kill, and I cannot play. Like, I'm sleep deprived enough. I am currently trying to understand camera flips and people turning on nausea and people just straight up killing me. Yeah, that was entirely my fault for enabling this. Like, look at that. Someone's inverted my controls. Can't believe it. And the worst thing about inverted controls is that I have to actually aim in the opposite direction if I want the knight to hit with the nail in the direction I want.
This looks awful.
Oh yeah, it is. Like, I mean, not to toot my own horn, but I was playing pretty well when I didn't have this mod. Yeah, nah. Oh god, no, come
on. I saw someone asking if coming out had changed my view of music in the chat.
Yeah,
I think
that's a great question.
So a big part of, I didn't really touch on this because I feel like it outs me as being it's having pretty weird views, but like I came to my gender discoveries from a very transhuman place and kind of thinking a lot about robots and kind of ascending from flesh prison kind of vibes, but on a less yeah, I don't know, on a less meme level. I do think about robots as people quite a lot and computers as people. So
I mean, it's interesting that you say that actually, because I'm not sure if you've watched Sky's kind of recent video on Cyberpunk, but specifically looks at Cyberpunk 2077 through the lens of, you know, like transhumanism and how that looks at kind of identities, because obviously there's a host of concerns regarding that with Cyberpunk, and Sky kind of put that under the spotlight, and it's a really interesting video, but it does talk about how, like, you know, the trans experience and the sort of, you know, transhuman aspects of Cyberpunk are kind of closely linked to a certain extent.
Yes, absolutely. Well, in that case, you should all go and watch Sky's video rather than hear me give a rehashed on the spot idea.
I'm sorry, we need to hear your idea.
Well, I was going to say how these things kind of translate into music for me, and the idea that, I mean, all of these things are just labels to help describe yourself, like whether you describe yourself as a man or a woman or anything on the gender spectrum. These are just words that help describe the experience. They're not the experience itself. you know, you can only be yourself, and what gender you assign to yourself is just a word to help other people understand what you're like.
Yeah.
So with music, I think I'm hugely into synthesizers because I see that same pattern with like. Oh, this feels like such a tangent.
No, crack on.
Is this okay? Sure.
Absolutely.
So how sound works, rhythm and pitch are the same thing. So if you play like just like a pulse, like and I did like more than 20 of those a second. If I sped that up, so it was like it would eventually become a pitch because like notes are described with like their hertz, so we can hear anything from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, and that's how many vibrations a second are occurring depending on whatever note's being played. And the shape of, sorry, this is such a I've gone into this all wrong. I feel like
No, take your time. Oh,
it's early in the morning. I'm trying to chat about it.
no, I'm interested in it.
Let me back up. So yeah, so when synthesizers make notes, they're just emulating kind of wave shapes. So like if a synthesizer is pretending to be a piano, it's just kind of emulating the same shapes that a piano makes and generating them 440 times a second to give you an A or whatever. So I think coming out and how this kind of links to non-binaryism is, I don't know, just that all sounds can be deconstructed back to their basic waves, and that nothing like the sounds of the orchestra or the sounds of bands are just vibrating waves that can be synthesized and emulated, and there's no such thing as like an authentic like essential sound. That's just something that can be recreated and performed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Makes perfect
So
sense.
I feel like, particularly when I do D&D, and like what I was saying earlier about how it feels like such a juxtaposition from doing all this queer synth pop art and then coming back to write these really dramatic orchestral scores. I just feel like it's parody because I know that it's all made up. I know that I don't have an orchestra at my disposal. I make it all with a computer, and it feels like I'm taking the piss a lot of the time.
Right.
But I mean, I love writing it, but I just know that there's such a like when people give the kind of gravitas that they do to writing for the classics, you know, like that kind of vibe. It's all made up. You can do it with a computer. There's no such thing as authenticity in the sense that people usually think about it.
And I suppose that kind of that is really interesting, the point you made there, and especially when it kind of jumps into like D&D, and I suppose one of the main attractions to D&D is, you know, you get to like inhabit like a character of your creation that's maybe kind of out with who you are at that time, or how other people see you at the time, and you can kind of embody that different character. I'm wondering, would you say that kind of ties into it a wee bit? And one thing I would say at the start, I've very much enjoyed your bit of voice acting. You're good with voices.
They're very good with voices.
Thank you.
We got to do one session of a Curse of Strahd game, and I desperately wish we'd gotten to do more. So we
did. That was one night where we managed to get time to do a session. I love voice acting. If anyone in the chat has something related that they need someone to do voices for, contact me. I love it. I'll do it for free. I don't care.
I mean, I was gonna say Sky might end up taking you up on that.
Possibly.
Can people stop inverting the fucking camera? Jesus Christ.
I think we have another speaker who's ready to come on.
Oh, brilliant.
Kind of a surprise speaker to some extent. So I'm just doing the little vamping session before they get moved in here.
That's all right. Would you like me to move out, or
No, you
you're
can
welcome
stay
to
as
stay if
long
you
as you
want
like.
to. Hello. Would you like to introduce yourself?
So you're talking to me?
Yes. Sorry.
Okay, hi. My name is Melusi Melani. I'm from the Kingdom of Eswatini. I'm founding executive of an LGBT organization called Eswatini Sexual and Gender Minorities.
It is. It's lovely to meet you. Sorry, we're a bit like.
We've
Lewis
been
has
going
just
for
woken up.
we've been
And-
going for 21 hours, Malusi. Thanks very much for joining for a chat. And you know, thanks very much for taking the time. So yeah, we were put in touch via Scott at the Ayequality Network.
Yeah.
How do you know Scott?
We met in 2018, actually. I don't know if it was the previous year, 2017, in Johannesburg, or the following year in London, but we have known each other since through the Commonwealth Equality Network, and I've got to learn of the amazing work he's doing in Scotland. And we've had quite fascinating conversations, you know, about how we both obviously share the history of the English rule against LGBT people, which unfortunately still exists in our parts of the world. So yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I suppose, unfortunately, Scotland isn't entirely innocent, and and we helped do a lot of the ruling, but no, it's brilliant to have you on, and I suppose it'd be great to hear about the work that you do in Eswatini. Would you be able to kind of just give us an overview, if that's okay?
Yeah, well, so the LGBT movement is old in our country, but you know, because it's a very conservative country, there's a lot of religion, and then it's intertwined and then sort of immersed into our culture and tradition. So it has made it very hard for a lot of people to like stand their ground and speak about the work that they do, or not even the work of the movement itself, but just owning their identities and being able to express themselves. So it only took to a point where our generation came to the fore. I personally have always been an advocate for change. I've always believed in, the social movement and social justice movement as a whole. So we pushed and pushed and pushed until 2018 when we were able to have the first Pride. And as one is growing up and getting to understand more on what the history is and what the problems we're facing are, so we've gotten to realize that, the state, the government only allows us to address LGBT issues if we're talking about access to HIV/AIDS. We are not even called LGBT people. We are just only allowed to call ourselves as key populations because, that's the whole World Health Organization language for people on high risk, due to their behavior, sexual behavior. So we literally just pushed up until a point where I then started with a couple of my colleagues the organization that today we call Eswatini Sexual and Gender Minorities. And we decided we no longer want to be referred to only based on our sexual activity and therefore, the proximity to HIV. So we wanted to be deliberate in our objectives, that we want to address human rights issues, we want to address equality for LGBT people. But unfortunately, the government said no, they did not want to register us as an NGO. So we said, that's fine. We took them to court. So we are just currently waiting a judgment for the matter, which of course is delaying. But I mean, unfortunately, there's only so much you can do if the matter is, pending in court and judgment has been reserved. But I mean, of course, on the ground, the work is made harder. I mean, of course, now there's the COVID-19 situation, which is not making it any easy.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've been struggling to find our voice and struggling to find allies and struggling just generally to to bridge the divide, between the general society and the LGBT community as a marginalized group.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that overview. It's good to hear that you're taking the fight to the courts. Wish you all the best in that regard. I suppose you mentioned there organising the first Pride event for Eswatini. Could you maybe talk a wee bit about that? Because I imagine the first Pride event for the nation is a really fantastic achievement to pull off.
It was a great success. I mean, for sure. Even though I personally never got to enjoy anything because, I was embroiled. I was embroiled in a lot of fights, a lot of back and forth with the state authorities, with the police authorities. I mean, building up to the day eventually. I mean, of course, with the support of the foreign embassies in the country, and of course, our Human Rights Commission in the country, we were able to pull it off. But I mean, I tell you, man, it was ridiculous. The build up, it was just crazy. On the day itself, I was exhausted. I was like a zombie. I mean, I was more or less feeling like you feeling now. You've been going at this.
Yeah, we can really relate, I think.
Yeah. So that was me on the first Pride celebration. But we were lucky to have a friend through All Out, an organization with the executive director in London. So they brought in a chap from, I think he's from Northern Ireland or he's from Ireland. So he was able to come and film, and document the entire process. So weeks later, I was able to then just sit and watch and take it all in and enjoy and have fun. So it was really great. I mean, fortunately enough, I was able to then go to Amsterdam to just see the pride that they have there on the same year. So it was quite fascinating to see that we were able to pull it off, and none of us had ever been to any pride. I mean, I personally had never been to any pride. I didn't even know what it's supposed to look like. But just looking at what was happening in Amsterdam, and unfortunately, I couldn't go to the one in London that very same year because of schedules. But it was fascinating to see that we were able to pull it off, and a lot of people had fun. And I always say, Pride is a riot. It should not just be a party. It should not just be about, celebrating who we are. Yes, it is about celebrating who we are, but more than anything, it's a riot. It's about standing our ground. It's about putting it on the faces of authority. It's about reminding people of the injustices. It's about reminding people that we need to do the right thing. So it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'm amazed. Did you say that you hadn't been to a Pride event at all, but you organised one, and it's the first one in your nation's history?
Absolutely. I mean, it was in a sense when I was in Amsterdam, I said to myself, "Wow, so this thing must really be in our DNA, man, to have been able to pull that off." And I had
that is absolutely incredible, and congratulations. I suppose one of the things that you also said there was it was you almost partnered with kind of the foreign embassies. What role did they play in helping Pride go ahead?
Yeah, so I think mostly it was the political advocacy. They are able to get into offices that we can't get into. They are able to speak to people in positions high enough. They're able to speak to our authorities. So, and it's that sort of relationship that has continued to this day, even though now the government refused to register this LGBT focus organization. They have continued to push the government, behind closed doors because we are not able to get into those rooms. So they're able to, sort of push our message for us. I mean, we just had the UK High Commission reopened after being away for so many years. And, when John came, I mean, I made sure that I got a meeting with him, and eventually we did have a meeting, and I made sure to remind him that this anti-gay law that we have, it's not to say it's the UK's fault, but I mean, it is a colonial rule that was left here. So, I mean, it's important that they remind the government whenever they have meetings with the king, with our prime minister, it's important that they remind them that they are holding on to an anti-LGBT law that does not even belong to us. So, so that's sort of pushing the conversation for us, because we can only make noise on the ground. We can only make noise to those sort of policy makers, to those sort of civil servants. But in terms of the authorities, we don't have the platform. I mean, it's not even a democracy here, so it just makes for a very unfortunate scenario where civil society can never really be able to converse to the powers that be.
Absolutely, and it's interesting to to hear. Obviously, again, Scotland is not blameless at all in this, but like the impact that colonialism has had in kind of establishing a framework set of rules that we kind of left behind. We went and
Right.
kind of changed, what we did, and it never quite rippled through. Um,
Right.
I suppose what would you say? Like obviously, the LGBT community is an international fight, and obviously we want to show solidarity in whatever country it is. What would you say to maybe some people who are listening in, whether they're Scottish or from the US or whatever? Like, what can we do to kind of help you get your message out there?
And I mean, solidarity, man. I think there is nothing that build that beats solidarity and intersectionality, and just making sure that we are together in this, and making sure that our voices are elevated. Just this past week, I was in a webinar where Ben Hunt, he's a BBC correspondent on LGBT issues. We were talking to him, and he was explaining how some of our issues, because I was complaining that some of our issues that are happening in our remote parts of sub-Saharan Africa don't ever get elevated or discussed at very big platforms. One, because we don't have the necessary resources to, for instance, go to Geneva and speak to the Human Rights Council there, or go to the UN and then speak to these issues, or reach out to these big news agencies. And he was just sharing with us how unfortunate it is that some of these big news agencies will not share a story because it does not make the cut. So I think it's important that we get the solidarity. It's important that we get the support. I mean, financially, yes, because a lot of this work costs a lot of money, and the situation is so dire that one does not even have the opportunity to sort of find economic empowerment opportunities for themselves. I mean, for instance, I'm struggling to get a job, and it's not because I'm not smart enough. It's not because I don't have the right qualifications, but just the fact that I'm virtually everywhere when it comes to LGBT people. I mean, every other week on the newspaper there'll be an issue on LGBT people, and I'll be quoted, and my picture will be splashed all over it. I've even gone to a point where I don't even care. I mean, I've dedicated my entire life to this thing, and I'm just like, I mean, there's no going back. So that sort of support is really important. And I understand that for many people, it's even harder to support movements in our parts of the world because, we don't have the registration, as an example. So that means we don't have the necessary mechanisms for accountability and stuff. But, just that sensitivity and understanding that it's not that we don't want the accountability for organizations, but the situation that we find ourselves in, it's hard for us to do anything. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know, just follow us on our social media pages and share the message with the world. Someone somewhere will probably be willing to reach out to us, and we discuss how they can support us in terms of resources, not just financial resources, but also in terms of capacity, because this whole movement building thing, it applies the same principles across the world. I mean, of course, it's different contexts, but it's the same principles of advocacy and changing hearts and then winning souls. So yeah, we need as much support as we can get.
Brilliant. And just while you were speaking there, we received a massive £150 donation, which is just incredible. So thank you very much. The person was anonymous who submitted that, so thank you. One of the interesting things you mentioned there was the intersectionality, and it kind of calls back to one of our very first speakers, Lady Phil, who's the co-founder and director of UK Black Pride, and
Yeah.
what what she was talking about, and I suppose kind of one of the more interesting things was, when it comes to standing up for minority voices, whether they be disabled, whether they be LGBT, whether it's a racial issue. I suppose that might apply a wee bit more to the UK, but when it comes to situations like that, you can't pick and choose. You're either for everyone and supporting and showing solidarity with everyone, or you're not doing anything.
Right.
And I think that's it's great to hear that seems to be a kind of resonating thing throughout the entire stream. Sky, do you have anything you want to ask or add?
Oh no, I've just been listening. It's really good to hear more international perspectives. Pride and the movement and everything that LGBT activists do is and should be for everyone. So it's just been really good to hear. Just to listen, really.
Yeah, I think that's more than anything. What we need is people to listen to us and hear our side of the story, because for too long we've been, run over by these dictators who want to share this narrative that LGBT issues are not an African issue, who want to share this idea that being LGBT is un-African, and you're like, look, old man or old woman, whoever you think you are, we are born in these parts of the world, and this is who we are. Where would we have taken it? And I mean, I'm talking about people who are not even exposed to a lot of these technological developments or TVs or radios, because some people pretend that you watch this thing on TV and then it's a lifestyle, and it's like, look, this is who we are, this is our lives, and all we want is equality. All we want is to be included, to be represented, and to be protected.
Absolutely. I suppose. Does anyone else? Lewis, are you still on? Is there anything you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I'm still here. No, I'm just listening. I think you're putting points into words that that I could not. I'm like, yes, this is exactly the kind of thing I want to be able to say.
Yeah, and you should not be afraid to say it. And say it out loud and out loud.
Absolutely. So suppose when it comes to when it comes to work that you're currently doing, obviously there's a lot of work on the legislation side of things, which is hugely important. What can I ask, like, how are you supporting LGBT people kind of on the ground, as it were, at the moment? Maybe they're struggling. How, like, do you cover more than just legislation, is what I'm asking.
Oh no, so we are very broad in terms of our approach. It's cross-cutting. I think when you think of advocacy, the legislative one, the legal advocacy, is just one part of it. It's a huge part of it, yes, but it's just one part of it. You have to be able to get to a point where you emancipate not the people through the laws only, but in terms of their minds. They need to understand their rights. They need to know the history of these laws that we find ourselves with. But over and above that, like I mentioned, there's the issue of economic opportunities, which are very slim for people like myself. So you've got to speak to trade unions to make sure that there are conversations about ensuring that LGBT people are afforded the same protections. You've got to speak to people like the employers' federations to make sure that, first of all, the issue of employment equality in the country is still very shaky. So you've got to work around policy issues so that people are given the opportunity. Then over and above that, there's the issue of education. The same opportunities afforded to any sort of general person is not the same that is afforded to the LGBT person. And this is not to say if the child is LGBT, they're going to be turned back, but it's about the treatment that they go through in the school system and the lack of protection herein. So that in itself sort of feeds into this sort of scenario where LGBT people are not afforded the same education as anyone else. So what we do is we talk to the school's authorities, we talk to, we talk to the teachers' unions to make sure that there is that sort of environment where LGBT children are protected at school. And over and above that, with the COVID as an example, we were able to raise money to buy food parcels. We were able to distribute to, I think it was over 120 LGBT people across the country. That sort of sharing and giving people hope to say you are not alone and we understand. So we do a lot of things, and of course there's issues like psychosocial support, which is a very very huge problem. I mean, just currently we were able to receive a grant through the Kaleidoscope Trust, and we are looking at training some of our LGBT people we're already working on it. In the next week or two, we'll be training some of our LGBT people so that they become psychological first aid responders, because we cannot all afford the psychological therapy. But if we have, the first aid responders on this field, then they are able to sort of deal with the more minor issues before referring them to those who might be able to sort of give help in that sense. So yeah, we are doing quite a lot of things for a small organization without the necessary resource, not only financial but also human resource, because we can't even afford to hire the people that we need to do most of the work. So we rely mostly on our members and our volunteers.
I mean, no, that's great to hear how broad your work is. One of the interesting things you mentioned there, I heard you were talking about education, and that's kind of where it starts if you want to change people's perspectives in society. I'm wondering if have you heard of the Time for Inclusive Education campaign here in Scotland?
No, not really.
Oh well, so Scotland was one of I think was potentially the first country in the world to start offering LGBT inclusive education in schools, run by, and we had one of the co-founders on earlier in the stream, Jordan Daly, and what TIE do is they've essentially kind of provided packs for schools to start learning a wee bit more about like including LGBT people in the education system. So one of the things that they do offer, and maybe it's something we can catch up on maybe after the stream, but they offer these packs for free. So it might be something, it might be a resource that your organisation would maybe want to have a look at if you wanted to bring those conversations into school. So it's all kind of pre-prepared, and it might even be a good idea to set up a call with Jordan and the folk at TIE to chat a wee bit more about it.
That'd be very helpful. I'd really appreciate that. I mean, and of course, being cognizant of the fact that our context is quite different when dealing with the school system, because we not only have to battle the homophobia, which then becomes bullying, but we also have to battle the state with their narrative of, oh, now you want to train children to be like you.
Yeah, the usual.
Yeah.
The unfortunate usual argument.
Right.
But no, it might be good, and because TIE make all of the resources free, it wouldn't mean that you need to create all these. You can have them primed and ready, so to speak. Another thing I thought was really fascinating about what you said there was, training people as psychological first aiders. I thought that was a really good idea, and one that I've heard the term before. I'm not sure how prominent it is here, but I kind of I love the idea of it. I wonder if you could talk a wee bit more about it.
So the way we look at it, I mean, there's your normal general health first aid. You get training for it. If someone, for instance, sort of collapse, you know how to do I don't know what it's called, CPR or something like that. Just your general first aid kit, that bandage when you've been hurt, when you've got a minor burn, that sort of small things that you're able to deal with, those sort of minor medical needs. But no one had really looked at how mental health as a health problem itself requires that first aid, because it cannot be that every time someone goes through that sort of mental health issue that they then have to start making appointments. Some things are so urgent, some things they require you to deal with them in real time. So if for us as a membership organization with over 170 members across the 4 regions of the country, which is a population 1.2 million, so I think 170 is a fairly good number. So if you've got some of these members trained in this psychological first aid, then in a sense you are able to sort of bring the services to the people in a quick and amicable time. So it's easier for someone to get so depressed that they find themselves committing suicide. It's very easy for that to happen. But if they know that, I can just speak to Melusi, who will be able to, sort of calm me down before then referring me to the necessary psychologists, the clinical psychologists, the social workers who are able to sort of talk you through the problems, that sort of prevents many of the atrocities we see. So we thought having this psychological first aiders would be very important in that sense, because also the whole issue of making appointments and going to the clinical psychologist, that takes time and resources. As I said, it's very limited in our country, specifically where the public health care does not focus on that at all. I mean, I was told by a colleague, I think some months ago, that we only have one psychiatrist in the country. So that gets to show how much neglected the mental health fraternity is. So if people, while they're making appointments, while they're raising money to see clinical psychologists, they've got that sort of first aid kit that they can use to take care of themselves. So that is exactly what we are trying to do, and we were very fortunate to get the funding through the Kaleidoscope Trust to do that, because we have now reached out to the Red Cross, whom, I mean, of course, they are meant to be doing some of these services for free, but they do charge for some training. So we were able to have a conversation with them, and the trainings will be going ahead. I mean, as you know, the Red Cross does a lot of these first aid and general health responses. So I think it's going to be interesting to have LGBT people, especially because even some of these clinical psychologists, they're not LGBT sensitive, So if you've got LGBT people who are doing it, it's even better.
That's what I was going to say. Like, it's so important to have, like, not only to have mental health support, but to have a mental health support that is primed to helping out LGBT people. Because so, like, if that's the reason that you're going in because you're not feeling support for what you're going through in that context, and knowing that the psychiatrist isn't going to be necessarily going to be on your side is even more daunting, So I think that's super important.
Just to let everyone know, we have another speaker about to come in. They might need turned up when they do join.
That's fair. I think I'm actually going to jump off.
That's fair, Liz. It was lovely to speak to you.
It was lovely to speak to you all, and thanks for having me. I hope the last hour and 45 goes well.
Hope so too.
Yeah.
Is there any social media or Spotify or anything you want to plug before you go?
Sure. If you want my D&D music, I'm Lewis Clark on Spotify. I should be easy to find. It should be quite obvious that it's D&D music. And then for my queer synth pop, you can find me at LewC, which is LEW-C. And I fixed the link in my Insta, so you should be able to get to my my music now. But yeah, thanks for having me, and good luck.
Thanks very much, Liz. Have a great day.
Thank you, Liz.
I will. See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Cool. So yeah, Melissa, I think thanks very much for kind of chatting about the sort of. I love the idea that there's going to be people who are equipped specifically to look at whether it's mental health and sort of like with an LGBT focus, because I think it will be quite daunting for people, especially if you say there's one psychiatrist. I imagine the queue for that psychiatrist is long enough, let alone the maybe the sort of cultural thoughts of that psychiatrist. It's better to greet them with a friendly face right up front.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Hello. Hi. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Becky. I work for the Scottish Trans Alliance. I'm a policy nerd, and when we were discussing this within our team, the majority of people in the team are like, I'm not sure I understand the whole concept of streaming online gaming and talking to people. And because my youngest son was super into this a while back, I'm the cool granny who understands.
Sorry, Becky. One wee second. Is there any chance you could turn up your mic a wee bit? I've cranked your volume up to the max. We're struggling to hear
Okay.
you.
Is that better?
It's a bit better, yeah.
All right, let's try that. Part of the problem is I got a new mic, and I think I've got it set now. Also, I'm on slightly dodgy internet. I'm in South Africa right now, and we had to travel to take care of a family member. So the internet's kind of not very reliable.
Yeah, we're having a wee bit of an issue on the technical side of things here. We're really struggling to hear.
Okay, this is probably the best I can do.
No worries. Sky, how's it on your end?
It's okay for me, but obviously, like, I've got the beefy headphones and stuff.
Yeah, likewise. I'm just wondering what's best to do in this situation, because I've cranked the volume up to the max.
Did that help at all?
It's definitely helping. Yep, we can hear you a wee bit more now.
Okay, I think I realized what was happening was my computer is trying to pick it up off the wrong microphone. So
Okay.
let's see if this is any better. How about now?
Let's go with that.
All right, we'll try that. Let me just double check. Yeah, because I've got my microphone turned all the way up as well.
Cool. No, well, yeah, sorry. Let's go again if it's possible. Could you introduce yourself if that's all right?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Becky from Scottish Trans Alliance. I'm a policy nerd, and I happen to be one of the people in our team that, although I'm one of the oldest members of our team, I actually, because of having kids who were always into streaming gaming and the different culture on that, I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. I thought I'd just come along and chat with you guys today. So here I am. Been doing lots of really nerdy policy stuff the last few months. My work focuses a lot in the criminal legal system. Just published a massive report on LGBT people in prisons through the University of Dundee, and I've been working really hard on the hate crime bill that's going through the Scottish Parliament. And then, of course, the general public conversation around trans rights that's been going on as we've been involved with Scottish Trans, I'm right in the middle of that. So happy to talk to people, chat to people, answer questions. I'm yours for the next little while.
Fantastic. We also have Malusi from Eswatini on the call as well.
Oh, wow.
Malusi, do you want to say hi?
Hi, Becky.
Hi, Malusa. You're closer to me right now than the people in Scotland are.
I imagine I am. It's nice to meet you.
I'm in Johannesburg.
Oh, really? Oh, that's
Yeah.
cool. Oh, that's cool. How was the weather in Johannesburg?
Sorry, Malusi,
Sorry,
what was that?
I was saying, how is the weather in Johannesburg? I heard it's been raining non-stop.
Well, it's been weirdly streaky. We came down at the end of January, just at the end of a heat wave, and then we had like 10 days of solid rain, and then we had
Wow.
another like 5 day heat wave, and now we've the last 3 or 4 days it's been raining, but the rain is breaking today. The sun's back out. And it looks like we're going to climb into another heat wave. So
Oh,
um,
Uh,
it's been really streaky, and when it's rained, it has been just. I mean, can't see the building next door kind of rain that hard.
wow.
I was just wondering if chat was asking if we can get the pronouns for everyone who is currently in the call.
Oh, she, her for me, Becky. Um, yeah, I should have put that in my.
He,
Can I
him for
edit
me.
my? Can I edit my name on here so it has my? I see some people have put that in there. Or is that when you do that when you set up?
No,
I can do that for
it's
you.
perfectly fine. It's just for the audience on Twitch, so they know, so they wouldn't see the name anyway. But yeah, he, him at this end as well.
And
then
they,
Sim.
them for me.
And I'm she, her, and I'm still here. I'm just doing emails.
Sorry, Joy. Good to hear from you.
I just wanted to say, I think we've just passed £7,000.
Oh, brilliant!
Wow, really?
I
Amazing.
think we might have. I'm waiting for the bar to update
Well, we'll wait and see.
before I say it officially. I was just wondering, Becky, if you could tell us a bit more about what Scottish Trans do. As a trans person myself, I'm quite curious about this. Also, yes, we did pass 7,000.
Groovy.
First of all, congratulations on passing 7,000. That's actually very impressive. Um, so, Scottish Trans Alliance started back in 2007. We have the distinction of being the very first trans exclusive charity funded by a national government anywhere in Europe. Um, we've worked continuously. Back in 2007, we were one person building a project, and now we're an organization. We have 3 full-time employees and a couple more part-time sectional workers, and we work to improve awareness and equality and human rights for trans people across Scotland. Our primary um, our primary means of going about that is through consultation with the trans community, research, and just expert experience. We engage with the Scottish government, public bodies, and businesses that do work in the public sphere to try to help them to understand the needs, the rights, and the needs, the rights, and how best to engage with trans people in a way that is positive, constructive, and inclusive. Um, the second stream of what we do is we work to provide a platform by which trans people in Scotland can engage with the government, public bodies, and businesses. We do this by setting up forums and meetings and encouraging and helping people to participate in consultation events. And there's a fair number of things that we try to do with the government and government ministers where we try to get trans people to be able to sit down with them and talk about their lives so that trans people are more substantial than just the abstract concepts that are often bounced around in political discussions, but that they're genuinely humanized. We've had a couple of events this year where trans people have been able to sit down with the Minister for Older People and Equalities, Christina McKelvey, and discuss their needs and their concerns with them. And now I guess it's the year before last, the pandemic has just sort of erased a whole year of our lives. Um, Back in late 2019, we held an event at the Scottish Parliament where we invited 9 trans people along to serve as a human library and meet members of the Parliament to and it's the primary goal of all of this is to do as much as we can to humanize trans people to the decision makers. You know, get them to stop thinking about us as abstract concepts or as those who are opposed to our rights would cast us as the scary specter in the distance, but rather to just sit down with people and go, hey, I'm a human being, and this is what I look like, and this is what my needs are. And so a lot of our work is builds around that. And then, I mean, and in fairness, we're policy nerds. So when it comes time to doing actual policy stuff like that, the we've got years now we've got years and years of expertise in how to help write policy that's inclusive for trans people. So in a nutshell, a very big nutshell, but a nutshell anyway, um, that's kind of what we do. Um, you'll be aware, very public facing, that we've spent a lot of the last several years campaigning for gender recognition reform. Um, that's been an interesting ride, and pretty much any trans person in Scotland will can understand what I mean by that. And we've just recently launched a new campaign to try to improve healthcare for trans people in Scotland, because we believe that somehow lost in everything that's taught was all the debates around gender recognition reform the last couple of years was the day-to-day lives of trans people. And one of the worst and most shocking things for trans people in their day-to-day lives is the shockingly horrible state of trans healthcare in Scotland. So we're now trying to drum stuff up like that. We also did a massive revamp to our website, www.scottishtrans.org, and launched that last week. And that's got information about our current work. And it's, for the first time in ages, doesn't look like it was put up 20 years ago.
No, that's fantastic to hear, and I think, from I mean, from what we've been like, kind of doing in the stream on the firstly, one of the reasons we decided to do the stream was kind of compounded by what was happening in Scotland in regards to the sort of Gender Recognition Act. One, we wanted to make sure that we were raising money for the Equality Network, that obviously do a lot of the quite heavy lifting when it comes to consulting on legislation and all that good stuff. But we also wanted to make sure that we were kind of doing it as a kind of act of solidarity, because obviously it's quite a bad time at the moment, and I think Sky, you might be able to testify to that a wee bit more than I can.
Yeah, I think it's there's a lot of fairly scary stuff that's being said in trans politics and media discussions of trans people. Which makes it hard, I think, to be trans in Scotland at the moment, and the wider UK.
Well,
One of the
go ahead.
One of the things that I would, a thing that I'd reassure everybody about is I'm a little bit older than a lot of the trans activists in the country. I'll be seeing my 60th birthday next year, and I actually marched in my first picket line in 1969, and I've been involved in advocating for people who have been marginalized since I was a child. I was 12 years old the first time I got dragged out of a classroom by a teacher by my ear for standing up for one of my classmates that she had hit. And I've watched equality movements come and go, and I've seen the nature of trans rights. I waited till I was 50 years old to transition, partly because I saw the world. I You might pick up from my accent. I'm from the United States, and I moved to Scotland when I was 50, and I transitioned in Scotland. And the period from 2011 to 2015, when I went through most of my transition and became really active with Scottish Trans, were glory days for trans people in Scotland. We had the ear of everybody. People were being quite good to us, and one of the things that we have to remember is that, as difficult as it has been the last 2 years, and as hard as it feels like we've moved backwards in the last year and a half, we're still better off than we were in 2010. We're still significantly better off. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be upset about the way we're being treated or that we shouldn't continue to fight, but it's to reassure people that equality movements aren't linear. You don't always climb in a straight line. And there are times that you get pushed back because the people who fight against, you know, we're historically marginalized because people wanted to marginalize us, and the people who are marginalizing us don't give up that ground all that easily. And we had made massive progress by 2015, and then the the pushback came, and the pushback has been, they were subtle at first, and they framed it as reasonable concerns about women's space and all of these things. The the one thing that we've seen increasing in the last 3 or 4 months is that the people behind this movement to push back on us have had to increasingly show their fangs and show just how nasty they are. This past
Yeah.
Monday, this
So,
past Monday, I was invited to a parliamentary roundtable where I had to sit with a smile on my face while two of the more outspoken opponents of trans equality in Scotland sat and told a parliamentary committee all kinds of lies about trans people. And the reactions I got afterwards from members of the committee and things in private led me to believe that not everybody's buying what they're selling anymore. So it's important to remember that as bad as it's been, um, there it's it gets better, and they're not going to be on top forever, and we continue to push and we continue to fight and we continue to talk reasonably, and we continue to remind people that we're genuine human beings trying to live our lives.
I
I
think
think. Sorry, go on,
that
Sky.
that's really, yeah, it's really reassuring to hear. Um, we got a few messages in the chat, thanking you for fighting for so long, and we also got a message from one of our mods, which was, thank you for this. Sometimes I feel like being 27 means I'm too old to transition, and it's so encouraging to meet older trans people. It gives me so much hope.
That
Um,
makes me feel very, very good. If I could respond to that with something been my philosophy of activism for my whole life. Activism and life, as as a trans person or really in any situation, it's about a continuation of moving forward of life. We're here because of the work of those who went before us. We are using our moment to do what we can to make the world better for those who come behind us. And it doesn't actually matter what your age is. It matters about your life circumstances. There's no ideal time um, to do things. It has to be the right time for you, and it has to be the right time for your circumstances. And you're not a bad person if you wait a long time to transition, if your circumstances dictate that. Um, you do what you need to do for yourself when it's right. And that's the best way to go about it.
Right.
yeah.
One of the
I was
things
just,
I'm
I
quite
was
keen
just,
to ask you, Becky, if it's all right. You mentioned, and maybe Melissa, I'd be interested to hear your perspective of this as well, in your sort of own thing with Eswatini. But you mentioned like how a lot of the time it's LGBT people being almost spoken about in the abstract, trans people specifically in this point. But I imagine, um, maybe in Eswatini it's more the wider LGBT community. Um, like, it is about that kind of like, actually putting a face in front of these people. I'm just wondering if, Melissa, do you have any views on that? And then Becky, you can maybe jump in as well.
Uh, yeah, it's a fascinating question to ask. I mean, to this day, people still don't believe that LGBT people exist, right? They just think of us as an idea, which is why I said prior that they always see it as a lifestyle, something that we will outgrow, something that is a hype. And it's very disheartening and discontenting because you're talking about real lives, you're talking about real experiences of living, and And one cannot go around every day and just being referred to as some sort of experimental lifestyle or a hype. And it's so sad because that is where then the whole issue of prejudice, stigma, and discrimination stems from. Just us not being seen as human. I mean, it's worse for the African context because there's always that westernized idea that this is an export of some sort from the westernized or Eurocentric idea of what people should be, or something that is here to distort and destroy our culture. So yeah, it's something that we go through every day. But what you're gonna do? You're not gonna stop doing the work because you are being met with these horrific expressions.
That's an interesting that you bring up the point of exported Western culture. I do a fair bit of international work. I'm involved my work on LGBT people in prisons. I've traveled to Brazil, and I have groups I work with in India, as well as I'm reaching out to people down here in South Africa as well. And one of the conversations, and it actually came up in a slightly different academic context. I contributed to a book a couple of years ago called the Scottish Feminist Judgments Project, which is a which it's an academic legal book that a group of legal and other scholars and people with some social experience took a number of historic legal cases and rethought them as if feminist judges ran them. And it's part of an international series of similar projects. And we held a forum for, and and I think Melissa, you'll laugh at this. I certainly did when it happened. Is they decide. So there's been an independent Canadian project. There's an independent American project. There's a Scottish project. There was an English project, and they decided to have an African project. And so the people who were working on the African project came to Edinburgh, and I attended an event. And the first question that I asked them is, how in the world are you having one single African project? Africa is a big place. And going from the northern tip of Africa to the southern tip of Africa, you have so many different cultures and legal systems. How can you possibly
Absolutely.
have a universal thing? And I'm segueing a bit, but the big question that I asked one of the women who was there for that project was that question about how do you combat the idea that equality and equally recognition of historically marginalized groups like LGBT people and even women is somehow a Western concept that's being inserted to destroy
Mm.
traditional values. And she started by rolling her eyes and she said, yes, that's a battle we fight every day, is trying the people. See, my academic background, I'm a neo-Marxist sociologist who talks about power and how power is used by the people who have power to keep power. And one of the narratives that they often use is that exact narrative that you just brought up, Malusi, that any sort of narrative of equality, the narrative of um, the narratives of women's rights, the narrative of LGBT rights, is somehow or another destroying our traditional values. I had a similar discussion with some of my colleagues from India who didn't want to use the word equality because equality was a Western concept. And yeah, it's really strange and quite the struggle to try to get people to understand that um, respecting every single other member of the human race on a level playing field, whatever word you want to use, is not some sort of European concept.
Um,
Absolutely. Malusi, do you have anything to go back on?
I mean, nothing really, but just to agree with you, Becky, that it sort of is confusing. I mean, I like that point that you brought about the whole narrative of Africa as if Africa is a monolith. And I think this is true even in the broader LGBT movement. You found that the movement has moved towards a monolithic approach. You know, when you're talking about the queer narrative, when you're talking representation, you have to make sure that the queer voice is there. And then you have to remember and just think that you cannot just say the queer narrative or the queer voice, because the queer voice in itself is so diverse. I mean, I, as a gay man, I'm so diverse from other gay men because there's a lot of other identity issues within myself. There's a lot of other expression issues within myself. I mean, it's important that we respect the fact that even as a queer community, even as, I mean, for me specifically, as an African person, I'm so different from other people who might be like me. And if we're going to be speaking about equality, and if we're going to be speaking about inclusivity, we have to be sensitive to our diversity and our difference.
I
I just
couldn't agree with you more on that.
I just wanted to hop in and say I think Joy is leaving us, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Joy, if you want to obviously plug any social media or anything, or say
Yeah,
anything,
if
you have the
anyone wants
floor.
to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me at Joy Demora, or you can follow me on Tumblr at the Bibliosphere. I think most of my audience is still here. But thank you so much for a wonderful stream. I have all the emails from the book donations, and I'll be working on sending those out to you probably today and tomorrow.
Thanks very much, Joy. Pleasure to have you on stream.
Lovely
Thank
to
you
see
so
you, Joy.
much. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Yeah, if I could add a little bit more to what Lucy said, that's a really common battle that we fight as far as this idea of this monolithic view of LGBT or even just trans people. I mean, trans people are a widely diverse group of people, and the i- the idea, first of all, that there is such a thing as one trans identity, and that somehow or another you can just create a space for that one trans person and you've created space for all of them, totally ignores the idea that of, like you said, diversity, the idea that we're all different and we all have different needs. And the other thing that's really challenging is that I'm a trans person, yes, but I'm also a sociologist, I'm an academic, I'm a grandmother, I'm a parent, I'm so many things, that to just chuck me in a box as a trans person and think that every engagement with me has to be contextualized by my transness is really wrong. My transness impacts my life, of course, and I don't want it to be erased, but just as equally, I don't necessarily want it to be centered every minute of my life.
And it's interesting you say that, Vicky, because it also touches on something else that other speakers have kind of touched on, is that, like, the very nature of being LGBT, or the very nature of being trans, almost forces people into taking that sort of activist role where they need to be like so clued up and commenting on everything. And I'm just, it's interesting that, you know, obviously, in cases where, you know, LGBT rights aren't, you know, sort of legislatively protected, there is almost this kind of just fight by circumstance, even if you don't really want to be defined as such.
Yeah,
Oh, one of the
amongst sorry, amongst my friends group, we've called it forced activism, or because my friend group are all LGBT, and not all of us want to be classed as activists. Um, sorry, I interrupted you.
no, it's okay. That's actually really valuable lead into what I was about to say. Is one of the things, and because of my role, I find myself sitting in rooms with senior equalities people at public bodies and businesses and stuff. And there was a period about a year ago when all the rage in the corporate world was this thing called reverse mentoring. And the idea was to pick out somebody from a marginalized background within your organization and have them come sit with the CEO and teach them about their lives. And it was actually an activist for the deaf community who first made this point in a advisory group that I was part of, and I quickly jumped in on her side, and the two of us made a really powerful argument in that meeting. And I've actually made it one of my key things is when a trans person, an LGBT person, a disabled person, a person of color, anybody goes to goes and gets a job, the reason they go and get a job is because they want to work. They want a salary, they want to pay their bills. They don't go to be an advocate for their community. So it's really wrong for employers and service providers and others to expect the people within their own team who happen to share an identity with different marginalized groups to be the advocate for that. And yet, all too often, lazy employers and service providers do that. And one of the things that I constantly am banging on about with them is that they need to put the work in themselves to learn for themselves so that they can advocate for their employees and not force their employees or their service users to advocate for themselves. And it's really, 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 I think it's really important for people to you can be an activist if you want to be an activist. You can be an advocate for both yourself and others if you want to be, but you shouldn't be forced to be. You know, when you go to work, when you go to school, when you go out and use services, you should be able to just do that as a person. And that's what equality ultimately comes to down to is that letting us just live our lives as people.
Yeah, 100%. I really resonate with that.
Sorry, Sky, I'm gonna duck out just for a sec.
No, that's quite right. Yeah, no, I really resonate with that. I'm very. It kind of gets misconstrued. I found when I explain, sometimes I don't want to be the trans activist or the trans person in class or the employment or whatever. I just want to be me. And I'm being trans and being bi are just part of that. And sometimes it's weirdly labeled as like whatever I guess the opposite of pride is, where it's like I'm still proud of my identity. I don't want to be purely defined by my sexuality and gender.
Well, it's
Um,
interesting as well is you're allowed to just be tired. You know, it's the what a lot of people forget is that if somebody takes up a cause, say you're really super opposed to global warming and you're fighting really, really hard for the environment, when you go home at the end of the day, you can turn it off. You can plug into a video game or watch some good, stream some Netflix or, curl up with your knitting or whatever it is that you do to distract yourself and you stop you can literally stop being the environmental activist for a while and you can turn off and you can rest and you can recharge. I can never turn off being a trans person. I take that
yeah,
home with me. I go to bed with it. I wake up with it. It is who I am. It will always be who I am, and there's nothing I can do about that. But I should have the ability and the right, and I do have the desire to not always have the activist part define me. I actually spend very little time on social media, just the essentials for keeping on top of things with work, for the very fact that there aren't enough hours in my lifetime and I don't have enough capacity in my brain to be living this 24/7 365. And I have to turn off. I have to walk away. And sometimes I want to walk away even when I'm in the middle of a public setting.
yeah. Um, uh, Malusi, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I think Becky raised an important issue earlier. The heavy burden that is placed on queer people in spaces of influence, in position of influence. I think it is unfortunate. Yes, you're right. The expectation that we will have
say, for instance, if you've got a very fancy job at Coca-Cola, then we will expect for you to be that advocate of change. I think it's unfortunate and it's unfair. However, I do believe that we all must play a role. I do believe that we all must do something. I mean, you cannot expect me as a, say, as a CEO at Coca-Cola to be working towards LGBT inclusivity representation. However, it must be upon me as someone who identifies a certain way to ensure that those who identify like me, or just generally those who are marginalized in community, because I think sometimes we make the mistake of expecting only the queer folk in position of influence to do the job when it's supposed to be about everyone in a position of power, in a position of influence, to do the job and to make sure that there is inclusivity and to make sure that at the very least there is a do no harm policy, because it's about making sure that you do not harm anyone. It's about making sure that your policies as an institution or your policies as an environment or a community are not harming those who might not have the voice and the power. Yeah, and I think you're right in saying that sometimes people go into jobs just because they're trying to find uh, economic opportunities and emancipation. And unfortunately, as queer people like myself, I mentioned this earlier, we're not afforded those same opportunities. We're not afforded those same platforms. So we will then be forced to move into activism, or will then be forced to move into advocacy, which is unfortunate. We need to allow people to be who they are in whatever space or area that they want to excel in, and perhaps in areas that they have skills in spaces that they're passionate about, so that they can, become our agents of change, not necessarily activists, but at the very least, agents of change, because we are definitely going to look up to them and say, if someone like me can hold that position. I remember in 2019, I was at the One Young World Summit, and I sat on a panel with at the time she was an acting CEO of, I can't remember the organization, but I think it's an insurance organization in the UK, and it operates internationally, and it's a Fortune 500 company. And I was saying in that panel, it's so great for us sitting here, and I'm just sitting next to a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and I don't expect her to be an activist. I mean, she's got a huge company to run. I can't expect her to be an activist, no. But she must, at the very least, and she is, of course, you know, being that agent of change, just us being able to look at her and say it's possible, and her within that sphere of influence saying, I'm going to do anything I can to make sure that we have a do no policy. So yeah, I mean, I don't know.
If I could respond to that a little bit, I agree that every human being on the planet has a certain obligation, and it's interesting, and it's also really interesting to try to see the different contexts from which we're speaking. Um, Obviously, I speak from a position of a certain amount of privilege because I'm comfortable financially. I've got multiple advanced degrees. I'm white. Um, I'm old enough that I've got a pension already set up. So I have layers of privilege that allow me to sit in a position to say, I can be active. I can stand up. I can throw myself in front of the bus for a cause, because at the end of the day, I know that there's going to be food on my table next week. I have absolute respect for the people who throw themselves in front of buses for causes at the risk of their next meal, at the risk. And in situations like yours, Malusi, where you're in a country where you can still be actively denied employment just because you're a gay man, that is a very different context for a lot of us who live in the UK, who for as unpleasant as the social environment against trans people has been for the last 2 years, the reality is we still have anti-discrimination laws. We still have the legal right to work, and we have the legal right to discriminate against us. And that changes the playing field for the different people involved. That said, regardless of whether you're in a place where things are just really, really horrible or a place that things are kind of good but aren't bad, yes, every single person, every single human being, whether you're a member of a marginalized group or not, ultimately has an obligation to promote the idea of diversity, inclusion, and ultimately equality, because equality is actually a fairly simple mathematical relationship. If any one person isn't equal, then equality doesn't exist. And so, as long as there are people being marginalized in the world, as human beings, we have an obligation. I think where it gets to be a problem is you get a level of fatigue within the marginalized communities who are always advocating for themselves. And the people who can and should be our allies often sit back until after we're either totally exhausted and spent or until it happens to be convenient for them. And that's a lot of where I'm going at. That's a lot of where I'm going at when I say that I go into public bodies and say, listen, you do the work sometimes. Don't always make us do the work for ourselves because we do need allies. I mean, a particularly poignant statistic from the UK is in the 2016 British Social Attitude Survey. 1% of all the respondents said that it was appropriate to discriminate against trans people all the time. Now, the majority of people reading that statistic will look at that and go, oh, good, 99% of the population of Britain know better than to discriminate against trans people all the time. But interestingly, if you turn back and look at the statistic that shows that roughly 6% of the British population are trans, and less than half of that 0.6% are are out as trans, it basically means that the people who hate us enough to tell a perfect stranger in a survey that it's okay to harm us whenever they want outnumber us 3 to 1.
Yeah,
So we need allies, we need friends, we need people to stand up and speak for us and with us. Don't speak for me if I'm in the room, but darn it, if you know what I need and I'm not in the room, speak up for me.
I think that's a great way to put it. I'm aware that Malusi, I believe you need to head off fairly soon.
Yes, absolutely. It was really great speaking to you guys, and you raise important points, Becky, and I'm so glad that you guys did this. And shout out to your organization and congratulations on all the money that you've raised.
Thank you for joining us.
Ab-
It was great to hear your perspective as well.
Lucy,
Absolutely.
it's an absolute pleasure. And at some point, I'd kind of like to reach out and get to know you a little bit better, especially because I spend a fair bit of time down here in Africa now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the Sky can share my email with you, so we continue being in touch.
I think I got your email from Scott Cuthbertson, so I
Yeah.
think you have a more direct
Oh,
link
Scott may
than me.
probably. I could talk to Scott. I can talk to Scott. I can certainly get your email from Scott then. Cool.
Um,
Cheers.
I'm gonna be sharing Malusi's social media and website in the chat. Um, give them a check. Give them a check out. Thank you for being here, Malusi.
Thanks very much,
Bye.
Lucy. Pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure.
Cool. So our next speaker is hopefully getting sorted.